The forest has a way of holding its breath at night. Every sound becomes sharper. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, even a faint drip of dew slipping from a branch. I was walking along a narrow trail when I realized how quiet everything had become. The air felt heavy, filled with the kind of silence that makes you slow your steps without even knowing why. A pale fog drifted through the trees, curling low along the forest floor, swallowing the path behind me. My flashlight flickered, weak and unreliable, as though something unseen was pulling at the beam. The deeper I walked, the more I felt it, the sensation that I wasn't alone. I reached a small clearing, open to the moonlight. The mist was thicker there, swirling as though stirred by a breath. And in that silence, I heard it, a soft humming, not from the trees or the wind, but from the ground itself. It rose and fell like a chant, though no one was there. The branches swayed, though the air was still. I remember standing there, my heart beating slow, steady, and loud in my ears, when a shadow moved across the clearing. That's when I saw it. The forest was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Leaves hung motionless. Branches swayed, but there was no breeze. I stepped into the clearing just as the last pale light of dusk touched the treetops. The air sat heavy, almost sweet, like it had been waiting. Even my own breathing felt loud. The ground was soft, damp underfoot. I noticed the moss, dark green and thick, pressed into the soil like it was holding something down. And then, almost beneath my feet, I heard it, a whisper, soft, curling around my ankles, just under the earth. I froze. The whisper didn't sound like words I knew. It felt old. I crouched, pressing my palm to the soil. It trembled faintly, a pulse that ran beneath the surface. The whisper became a faint chorus, murmuring in tones too low for ears alone. I could feel in my chest, a vibration that was alive. Above me, the branches didn't move. The leaves didn't rustle. But somewhere just beyond the trees, a faint shift, like the forest itself, had inhaled. I took a slow step forward, the moss clinging to my shoes. The whispers reacted, not louder, not softer, different. They paused. The sun dipped further, and shadows pooled at the edges of the clearing. The air grew thicker. I could feel it against my skin, sticky and slow, like walking through unseen water. And still the branches swayed, slight unnatural arcs, though nothing stirred the air. I knelt, trying to touch the soil again. The whispers pressed closer. Names I did not know grazed my mind. A single, hollow syllable repeated, like a warning or a greeting I could not answer. I glanced up. The trees leaned inward now, not in the way a wind would push them, but in a way that suggested they were watching. A cold brush traced the back of my neck. I shivered, though the air had held no chill before. And then the whispers fell silent. Only the soft hum of the forest remained. Or maybe it was the clearing itself, exhaling quietly. I stepped back. The ground beneath me was perfectly still, and yet the soil seemed different, heavier, like it remembered the weight of every step ever taken there. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed to turn and run, but I stayed. Curiosity is a slow, sticky thing in places like this. The whispers returned, not underfoot, but around me, curling from the edges of clearing, faint like wind trapped in the roots, soft against my ears. They carried no words I could hold, only sensation, a soft insistence that I listen. I sank to the moss, letting my fingers press into the damp earth. The hum under the soil pulsed stronger, like a heartbeat, a rhythm that matched mine, and then did not, faster, slower. It was mine and not mine. The branches swayed again, still without wind. I could see the dark outlines against the dimming sky. They looked deliberate, almost waiting. I lay back, staring at the patch of sky above. The leaves shivered, the moss whispered, the earth breathed beneath me, and I thought I understood something vague and impossible. This clearing wasn't just still, it was aware. Time slowed. A faint scent, iron and wet, rose from soil. It clung to me, filling my nose and lungs. I tried to lift my head. The ground hummed beneath my palm, tugging softly, insisting I remain. The whispers curled tighter, and then they stopped. A calm, unnatural silence fell, heavy as fog. The branches stopped moving. The moss pressed flat. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I left the clearing slowly. My steps were careful, measured. The forest around me resumed its usual noises. Birds, distant twigs snapping, the rustle of leaves. But the clearing remained, still, waiting, and I knew I would hear it again. Beneath the soil, soft, patient, whispering for the next step, the next pause, always beneath my feet. The forest had taken on a new shade by nightfall. Shadows pooled between the trunks, thick and soft. Mist drifted along the ground, curling around roots and fallen leaves. I walked slowly, each step muted by the damp soil. That's when I saw it. A faint glow, hovering just beyond a line of birch. A lantern, swinging gently, though no one held it. Its light was pale, almost blue, and it flickered as if breathing. I took a cautious step closer. The flame dimmed slightly. I stopped. It brightened again. The air smelled faintly of smoke, or maybe wet leaves. Hard to tell. Every step I took seemed to pull the light further, just out of reach. I tried not to breathe too loudly, not to startle whatever held it. The lantern swung again, back and forth, a rhythm that felt deliberate. I moved closer, my hand lifted, half in instinct, half in curiosity. The flame flickered lower, almost guttering. I froze. The mist thickened around me. It clung to my clothes, my hair, dampened my eyelashes. I could hear the soft rasp of my shoes against the fallen leaves. The forest had gone quiet. No birds, no distant rustle. Just a lantern swinging in place. I reached out, closer. The light dimmed again. I wanted to touch it, to see what held it, but something in the air warned me. Not with sound, not with voice. A feeling deep in the chest that would not like to be found. The lantern swung faster now. Or perhaps I was moving slower. The glow seemed to pulse in response to me. I could feel the heat faintly, not on my skin, but behind my eyes. I paused. The flame warped, stretched, as if someone or something was holding it just beyond the veil of the trees. A faint scent of old wax rose. Then something else, something metallic, sharp. A whisper, too soft to catch words, drifted with the smoke. I stepped closer again, and for a moment I could see a shadow behind the lantern. Not a body, not a figure. Something hollow. It vanished when I blinked. The lantern dimmed, almost extinguished. I leaned forward, heart thumping, and the flame surged. A teasing warmth, a promise that it would not burn me. Or maybe it was a warning. The mist coiled around my ankles, slow and thick, tugging. The trees shifted slightly, though there was no wind. Their branches arched inward, like fingers framing the lantern. I realized I was standing in a circle of shadows and light, and the glow had become the center of it all. I couldn't look away. Each blink made the lantern sway further, a pendulum teasing the edges of vision. It hung there, suspended, aware, and I felt watched, not from the trees, not from the darkness behind me, from the lantern itself. I wanted to turn to walk away, but the glow held me. A soft vibration passed through the soles of my feet, humming faintly. The flame pulsed, slower now, like a heartbeat. I imagined hands. No, not hands. Branches, leaves, shadows, all holding it steady, all waiting for something. The mist thickened, swirling around me. The lantern swung once more. Then it stopped, perfectly still. The air smelled damp and metallic. The quiet pressed against my ears. I realized I had been holding my breath, and in the silence, I felt the slightest tug on my sleeve. A cold brush, like someone reaching from the edge of the light. I stepped back. The lantern flickered weakly, then brightened. It hung there, suspended, watching me leave. Every step I took, the flame seemed to shrink, moving with me. And when I finally turned my back, it disappeared. For a moment, the forest returned to ordinary night. The mist curled, the leaves rustled faintly, and shadows relaxed. But I knew it had not gone. Not really. The lantern waits, swinging gently, somewhere beyond the trees, always just out of reach. And I can still feel its heat behind my eyes, its pulse in my chest, its quiet insistence. that I will look for it again. The forest was darker here. The trees grew close, their trunks thick and unyielding. Twilight filtered in faint streaks, catching on damp leaves. I followed a narrow path, roots curling like veins underfoot. The air smelled of earth and something older, stone, cold and dry. And then I saw them, a circle of stones, perfect, evenly spaced, ancient and gray, rising from the moss as if they'd grown instead of been placed. I stopped at the edge, the mist curling around my ankles. The air changed immediately, colder, not the sharp bite of wind, but a slow seep into my bones, a stillness that pressed against my chest, making each breath deliberate. I stepped inside the ring. The ground was smoother here, moss flattened, soft. My feet made no sound, yet I felt them sinking slightly, as if the earth itself was listening. Voices came first as echoes, faint, distant, barely more than vibration. I tilted my head. They weren't speaking words I recognized, only tones, soft hums, rising and falling like water over stone. I moved to the largest stone. Its surface was rough, uneven, cold under my fingertips, and yet it vibrated slightly, a pulse I could feel through my palm. The hum grew louder, synchronized with the pulse beneath my hand. I stepped back. The circle seemed to expand. The stones, massive and still, now felt aware. I could see shadows stretch unnaturally across the ground, reaching toward the center. The mist thickened, curling around my legs, pulling softly. A faint scent of smoke and wet stone rose. The air grew heavier, pressing down from above. I swallowed. Every instinct told me to leave, but I was drawn deeper. I knelt, tracing the outline of a smaller stone. The hum beneath it became a vibration in my chest, a heartbeat that was not mine. I could hear the faintest whispers, close to my ears, almost in rhythm with the windless swaying of the trees outside the circle. I straightened and the cold deepened. My breath fogged. I could see my exhale hovering in the air like a pale ghost. And then, faint but unmistakable, a voice echoed, soft, deliberate, impossible to place. It was behind me, or beneath me, or both. I turned. Nothing, only the stones, silent and looming, and a mist, thick and curling like smoke from a long-dead fire. I walked slowly around the circle. The stones seemed taller now, looming, bending the faint moonlight into strange angles. My shadow stretched impossibly, twisting across the moss in ways my body did not. I stepped closer to the center. The hum rose to a low, vibrating tone resonant in my bones. A faint rustle, like fabric or dry leaves, whispered at the edge of hearing. I froze. The air grew colder still. I could see the mist shifting, coiling toward me as if drawn by the pulse of the circle. And then the faintest flicker, light, like pale moonlight on wet stone, glimmered at the base of one of the stones. I knelt, reaching toward it. The hum thrummed through my hands, sharp and alive. I pulled back. The light vanished. The mist retreated slightly, but the cold remained, sinking into my spine. I realized I had been standing in the circle for longer than I thought. The sun had fully set. Shadows merged with mist, the forest pressing close. I could no longer tell where the circle ended and the forest began. A soft whisper rose again. Not words. A tone, persistent. It called to something in me I didn't recognize. I stepped outside the circle. The cold followed, brushing the back of my neck, clinging like a shadow I could not shake. The hum faded, leaving only silence. But the silence was heavy, deliberate, waiting. I glanced back once. The stone seemed unchanged, but something had shifted. A presence lingered just inside the edges of the circle, patient and quiet. I walked away, feeling the pull of the circle in my chest. Every step forward felt like a return. The forest around me whispered, leaves rustling faintly, and I knew that the hum, the pulse, the awareness of those stones, it would wait for me, always. The forest thinned as I approached the riverbed. The water was gone. Only dry stone and cracked mud remained, pale in the fading light. The air smelled of damp earth, with a faint sweetness underneath. I noticed her immediately. A woman, kneeling by the riverbed. Her hair was dark and straight, falling over her shoulders like ink spilled onto stone. She hummed softly, a melody that made the air feel warmer, lighter. I stepped closer. The humming grew clearer, almost soothing. Her hands moved over the dry riverbed, brushing stones gently, like she was coaxing something from the earth. I thought I could see shapes, tiny flickers of light, slipping between her fingers. The forest around us was quiet. No rustling leaves, no distant animal calls. Even the wind seemed to have paused. I called her name. She didn't answer. Her humming continued, steady, low, and calm. I stepped closer still. My shoes crunched on dry mud, breaking the fragile quiet. She turned, not fully, only her head lifted, her face hollow. No eyes, no features except the faint outline of cheekbones and lips. A void stared back at me, pale as a cracked riverbed. I froze. The humming stopped. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then a soft, low laughter drifted from her throat. Not musical, not human. I wanted to step back. I wanted to run. But my legs felt heavy, rooted in the cracked mud. The void of her face drew me, silent and endless. The air grew colder. It pressed against my skin, carrying the faint scent of wet stones and old water. Her hands moved again, brushing the dry riverbed. Each movement left a ripple in the dust, though there was no water to carry it. I realized the hum had returned. Not from her, not from the riverbed, from beneath the stones. A vibration I could feel in my chest, like something breathing slowly underground. I swallowed. The void of her face seemed to tilt, following me. I could feel in my bones, the way eyes that weren't there could still see. A pull, soft but insistent, tug at the back of my mind. The sky darkened. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the cracked riverbed. The wind rustled faintly, only around her, carrying a whisper I almost recognized. Not words I knew, just a tone, familiar and alien at once. I stepped forward. She rose slowly, pale limbs moving with quiet deliberation. Her humming began again, low and haunting. The void of her face seemed to deepen, hollowing further into something beyond comprehension. I could feel the dry mud beneath my knees giving way slightly. Each step closer made the air heavier, colder. The stones underfoot shifted imperceptibly, like a pulse beneath the ground. I wanted to speak, to ask her who she was, but no words would leave my lips. Her hands lifted, tracing invisible lines in the air. The humming grew louder in my chest and in my ears. And then the laughter returned, soft, echoing, carried through the hollow space where her eyes should have been. The forest around us seemed to lean in listening. Even the trees stretched toward her, silent witnesses to something older than me. I felt the weight of it, heavy in my chest and my bones and the soles of my feet. I stumbled back. The dry riverbed seemed endless now, stretching farther than the eye could see. And still she followed, gliding just behind the edge of my vision. Her face remained hollow, her presence complete. I ran. My steps kicked up dust, dry and sharp, but the sound didn't carry. The humming lingered, chasing me through the trees. Every shadow I passed seemed to flicker toward her, reaching, touching, pulling. Finally, I burst into thicker forest, where darkness swallowed the edges of the clearing. My chest heaved, my hands shook, and yet in the quiet, I could still hear her hum. Soft, patient, watching, always there, at the edge of the riverbed, waiting. The forest had grown denser. Twilight clung to the treetops, spilling shadows across the path. Leaves crunched softly beneath my boots, though the sound felt strangely distant. I followed the trail, careful with each step. Branches leaned close, brushing my shoulders, sticky with dew. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp soil, rich and heavy. At first, it seemed ordinary. The trail curved gently, sunlight fading, shadows stretching. But then I noticed it. The path had returned to the clearing. The same clearing. The one I had stepped through just minutes, or was it hours, before. I blinked. The trees were in the same positions. The moss-covered stones, the hollow stump near the edge, the soft rustle of leaves, all exactly as I remembered. I walked again, slower this time. The trail wound forward, twisted around a large oak, and led back to the same spot. The forest had not changed, and yet something had. The air felt thicker, the shadows longer, the clearing waiting. I tried another direction. Left, right, straight. All paths bent silently, inevitably back to that same clearing. The moss seemed to press more firmly under my feet. The earth hummed faintly, patient, insistent. I crouched, pressing a hand to the soil. It was soft, pliant, almost breathing beneath my fingers. The whispers of leaves and branches surrounded me, soft, deliberate, guiding, or mocking. I rose, my heart beginning to thump against the stillness. I noticed the branches. They arched inward, forming a tunnel of shadow around the clearing, framing it like a door. I felt the pull again, a gentle tug at the chest, at the back of my mind. I walked, the path curled under the roots, over rocks slick with moss. And still, I returned, the same clearing. Panic rose slowly, a cold weight in my stomach. I tried to run, faster, harder, breaking into a jog. Leaves whipped at my legs, twigs snapped underfoot, but the path folded itself back, silent, patient, inevitable. I stopped. My breath came in short bursts, clouding in the air. I could feel it then. The clearing was alive. It was waiting, and I was the one who could not leave. I crouched again. The soil pressed softly beneath my palms. A faint vibration ran through it, slow and deliberate. A pulse I could feel in my chest, in my hands, in my soles. And the air carried a whisper, a tone that was almost a voice. I lifted my head. The trees leaned inward. The shadows stretched unnaturally. Even the faint mist that had begun to rise from the soil seemed drawn toward the center. Everything was patient, watching, waiting. I took a small step forward. The moss seemed to cling tighter. The earth pulsed faintly, a subtle pressure against my back, like cold fingers tracing my spine. I tried another path, long, winding, twisting, but always back to the same clearing. The realization sank slowly. I was not lost. I was held. The forest, the trail, the clearing itself. It refused to let me go. The shadows deepened. The trees stretched higher, bending their limbs inward. The air grew colder, thick with damp and something older, heavier. I felt the quiet press around me, crushing and patient. I sank to the ground. The moss was soft, almost warm beneath my hands. The clearing waited, and I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath the soil, beneath the stones, beneath the path. Steady, unbroken, like a heartbeat that had always been there. Time slowed. I thought I heard soft footsteps circling the clearing. No child, no human, just small, deliberate impressions pressing into the earth, vanishing before I could reach them. I lay back, staring at the shadowed canopy. The trees arched above me like silent watchers. The trail curled endlessly away, only to return. And I realized finally that leaving was never an option. I am in the path. The path is in me. And the clearing, it waits. The forest thinned into a small clearing. Twilight lingered in the branches, catching on wet leaves and gnarled roots. The air was still, heavier than the windless night outside. I saw it almost immediately. A campfire. Its flames danced warm and steady. No one had lit it. No smoke rose. No scent of burning wood. I stepped closer. The fire glowed softly, orange and pale at the same time. The ground beneath it was dry, yet the flames clung to the logs as if they were alive. I crouched, leaning closer to see. The ash at the base shifted subtly, not blown by wind, not disturbed by animals. It moved as though something breathed beneath it, slow and patient. The air smelled faintly of earth, damp and metallic, but nothing of smoke. I held my hand over the flames. No heat, not exactly. A gentle warmth, pulsing like a heartbeat, brushing my fingers through invisible air. I sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. The fire did not crackle. It did not snap. It simply existed and watched. The forest around me had gone silent. No rustling leaves. No distant calls. Even the wind seemed to have stopped at the edge of the trees. I leaned closer to the fire again. The ashes shifted. Soft depressions appeared and disappeared as if small, unseen creatures moved beneath. A faint hum rose from the ground, almost imperceptible. I pressed a finger to the ash. It vibrated faintly. Alive. I could hear the faintest whisper from the edge of the clearing. Not words, only tones. Rising, falling, curling in the air like smoke that wasn't there. The fire flickered at the sound. The glow pulsed. And I realized it was responding to me. The warmth grew stronger, pressing against my hands. I withdrew. The flames dimmed slightly, almost pouting. The ashes shifted more urgently beneath the logs. I could feel it in my chest, a heartbeat not my own, slow, deliberate, patient. I rose. The fire did not falter. It burned steadily, glowing without consuming, and the clearing seemed smaller now, pressing inward. The trees leaned closer, their branches framing the flames, holding the edges of the light. A soft draft brushed my neck. I shivered. The hum beneath the ashes rose. The vibration in the ground synchronized with the pulsing of the fire. I realized I could not step away. The clearing did not want me to leave. I crouched again. The flames danced lazily. I imagined shadows moving in the corners of the firelight, just at the edge of vision, and the ashes shifted beneath me, faintly shaping impressions I could not recognize. I pressed a hand to ground. The warmth rose through my fingers, through my wrist. The heartbeat beneath the ashes thrummed in time with my pulse, but not quite mine. The forest remained silent. Even the windless trees seemed to wait. I felt the fire watching, patient and deliberate. I stood, circling the flames. The glow followed, stretching in unnatural arcs across the clearing. The shadows bent toward me, long and soft, as though the trees themselves leaned closer to see. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, and something metallic beneath. A sense of waiting pressed in, soft, persistent. I wanted to leave, to step away, but my legs felt heavy, reluctant. I stared at the fire. It did not burn. It did not consume. It simply existed, alive beneath my gaze. And I felt the pull, the silent insistence of something below the ashes, beneath the logs, something patient, eternal. I sat again, finally, letting the warmth press into me. The hum beneath the ground rose and fell. The fire pulsed softly in response. I realized then that it had been waiting for someone to notice, someone to sit quietly, someone to breathe slowly beside it. I did not speak. I did not move. The forest around me held its breath. And I understood something I could not put into words. The fire did not burn to feed. It burned to exist, to watch, to pulse in quiet, eternal patience. I left the clearing eventually. The fire glowed faintly behind me, untouched by distance, untouched by the dark. Its warmth lingered on my skin, in my chest, in my ears. And I knew it would wait for the next soul to sit quietly beside it. Always, the forest had grown quieter than I had ever known. Even the mist seemed to hold its breath. Twilight had faded into a gray, soft darkness. I walked slowly, leaves crunching faintly underfoot. Then I heard it, a single hoot, from an owl high in the trees, sharp, hollow, echoing between the trunks. And then nothing, silence, thick, heavy, pressing against my ears. Not the quiet of night, not the pause between sounds. A silence that felt alive. Shadows stretched across the clearing, long, thin, reaching like fingers. I could see them curl around tree trunks, around moss, around my feet. Slowly, deliberately, I held my breath. The air smelled of damp leaves and faint smoke from a distance I could not see. Even my own heartbeat sounded loud, echoing in my ears. Something moved just beyond the shadows. Not rustling leaves, not a snapping branch. A subtle shift, a brush of air, almost like something exhaling. I stepped forward. The shadows stretched further. They bent toward me, framing the clearing in dark arcs, long and patient. I could feel the pull of them, soft and deliberate, tugging at my shoulders, at the back of my neck. The owl hooted again, or maybe it hadn't. I could not be sure. Its call, sharp and hollow, lingered in the air as if carved into it. Then silence returned, heavier than before. The mist thickened. It curled around my ankles, soft and wet, brushing my legs like slow fingers. I tried to move. The forest had not changed. And yet, the shadows, they had. They leaned closer, reaching, watching. I crouched, pressing my hands to the cold, damp earth. A faint vibration pulsed through the soil, a heartbeat that was not mine. The shadows quivered in response, bending around the clearing. I felt eyes on my back, on the top of my head, even from beneath my feet. A low hum rose beneath the soil, soft, insistent, curling around my ankles and up my spine. I imagined the trees listening, leaning, waiting for the next movement, the next breath. I glanced upward. The owl, or whatever it called, was gone. Yet I could still hear it in my mind, a hollow echo bouncing through the canopy. I rose slowly. The mist parted reluctantly, and the shadows shifted with me, long shapes curling at the edge of vision. I could not look directly at them. They seemed aware of my attention. I walked carefully, every step pressed into soft leaves, soft soil, but made no sound beyond my own crunching. The air pressed closer now, cold and damp, carrying the faintest metallic tang. A movement flickered in the corner of my eye. A shape, tall, thin, darker than the shadows themselves. It did not move toward me, nor did it retreat, just lingered, waiting. I stopped. The silence thickened, wrapping around the clearing. The mist pressed into my skin, and the shadows, they stretched longer. Another hoot echoed, soft, far away, impossible to locate. And then silence. I realized my own breathing was loud. Each exhale a soft drum against the quiet. The pulse beneath the earth had slowed, but it had not stopped. I stepped forward, tentative. The shadows shifted with each movement, framing the clearing like walls of dark glass. The forest seemed to lean in closer. I crouched once more, letting the mist curl around my hands. The earth hummed faintly, a pulse beneath the soil. The shadows quivered slightly, as if acknowledging me. I did not speak. I did not move. The silence was not empty. It was full, patient, deliberate. Time slowed. The clearing held me in its gaze. The shadows stretched, the mist clung, and the earth pulsed softly beneath me. I left eventually, steps measured and careful. But even as the forest returned to ordinary night sounds, I could feel the silence following, a weight at the back of my mind, a presence lingering in the corners of vision, always there, after the hoot, waiting. The forest had thickened again, mist curled between the trunks, curling around roots and fallen leaves. It clung to my legs, damp and slow, like walking through something alive. I saw them first at the edge of my vision, faint shapes, tall, thin, barely more than silhouettes. They lingered just beyond the tree lean. Watching, I blinked. The shapes remained, still, patient, not moving closer, yet never leaving. The air smelled damp, earthy, and cold. Every step I took pressed wet soil beneath my boots, yet the mist seemed to swallow the sound. I could hear my heartbeat, loud and slow, echoing in the hollow of the trees. I stepped closer. The figures did not react. Or perhaps they did, subtly, leaning forward, stretching, bending, shifting just enough to remind me they were aware. A faint whisper ran through the fog. Not words, just tone. Long, low, deliberate. It curled around my ears, brushed the back of my neck. I wanted to turn, to run, but my feet felt heavy. The mist thickened further, soft and cold against my skin. It pressed into my shoes, my hair, my hands, and the shapes remained just at the edge of the fog, pale and indistinct. I tried to focus. Closer now, each step careful. I could see faint contours, like bones beneath skin, but impossible to place. No faces, only watching. And I felt it, the pull of them patient, deliberate. I paused. The fog swirled, forming soft arcs around the figures. Each shape seemed tethered to the mist, emerging and fading like breath on glass. The forest around me went silent. Even the windless branches stopped moving. I leaned forward slightly. A faint movement. One of the figures tilted its head, or maybe it was a trick of the fog. The feeling of being watched pressed against my spine, cold and insistent. Every nerve in my body screamed to step back. But curiosity rooted me to the soft, wet ground. The figures shifted. Not toward me, not away, just rearranged themselves. A subtle dance of shadows and fog. I felt the pressure of their presence, a silent insistence, curling around my ankles, rising in my chest. A faint metallic scent rose in the air, mingling with the wet, earthy smell. It was faint but sharp, like something buried long ago and freshly unearthed. I took another step. The mist moved with me. The shapes followed, neither hurried nor slow. They were patient, eternal, watching. I crouched, letting my fingers brush the soft, wet soil. A pulse rose beneath it, faint, slow. The figures paused. Or perhaps the pulse was drawing them closer, tethering them to me. I could feel it then. The forest had folded itself around the fog. The shapes and me, everything leaned inward. The trees arched overhead like ribs. The mist wrapped tighter. And the figures remained patient, aware, eternal. I stepped back. The ground was soft and clung to my boots. Every movement pressed into it, yet left no mark. The figures mirrored my motion, subtle, precise, silent. A low whisper rose beneath the fog. Not from them, not exactly. From the air itself, curling through the mist, brushing against my ears and jaw. Long, low, insistent. It was aware of me. I turned to leave. The path had vanished. The forest and mist folded in on themselves. I stepped in any direction, and the figures remained. At the edge, waiting, watching. The fog thickened, rising to my knees, then waist. The shapes blurred, stretching upward, fading slightly, then reforming. They never came closer, but neither did they leave. A quiet presence, patient and deliberate. I whispered to myself. No words carried, swallowed by the fog. I could feel the pull, the patience of the shapes, waiting for something I could not name. I kept walking. The mist swallowed my steps. The forest closed around me. And the figures, faint, watching, eternal, remained just at the tree lean, always there, always patient, waiting. The forest narrowed as I followed a faint path. Twilight had faded entirely, leaving only the soft gray of a moonless night. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, thick and heavy. And then I saw it, a tree unlike any other. Its trunk was massive, hollowed at the center, as if the forest had carved a secret chamber inside it. The bark was rough, twisted with age, and the opening yawned like a doorway into darkness. I stepped closer. The air inside the hollow shimmered faintly, warmer than the cool night outside. A soft hum vibrated from within, not loud, not harsh, but enough to press against my chest. It pulsed rhythmic, alive. I pressed a hand to the opening. The warmth seeped into my palm, into my arm, like a heartbeat beneath the bark. The hum grew slightly, synchronizing with the pulse under my fingers. The forest around me seemed to lean closer. Leaves shivered in place. Branches swayed without wind. The hum inside the tree became a faint, insistent tone, almost a whisper. Not words, just vibration, curling into my mind. I stepped closer still. The hollow was wider than I expected, dark inside, yet the warmth drew me in. I imagined placing my head inside, listening. The pulse matched my own heartbeat for a moment, then slowed, then paused, as if the tree was testing me. I could hear faint echoes from within, like soft footsteps on damp soil. Or maybe it was just my imagination. But the hum grew, insistent, pressing against my chest. A vibration I could feel in my bones. I knelt and pressed both hands to the hollow. The warmth pulsed stronger, wrapping around my fingers. It felt alive. A heartbeat not my own, patient, deliberate, waiting. The forest beyond the tree had gone silent. No wind, no animals, no rustle of leaves. Even the distant fog seemed to pause. All that remained was the hollow tree and the pulse beneath its bark. I pressed my ear to the opening. The warmth brushed my cheek. The hum vibrated softly, deep and steady. I imagined a presence inside, breathing slowly, patient, aware of me. I pulled back slightly, just enough to see. The hollow was darker than the night outside, yet I could feel movement within, a slow shift, almost imperceptible. The tree itself seemed to breathe, pulsing with a rhythm older than memory. I tried to step away. The forest air pressed against my skin, cooler now, almost reluctant, but the hollow tugged at me, a gentle insistence, not forceful but undeniable. I knelt again, letting my hands brush the rough bark. The pulse beneath the tree vibrated through the soil, my shoes, my legs, into my chest. It was patient. It was deliberate. It was waiting. I imagined reaching inside, placing my hand into the darkness. The warmth would seep deeper, touching something alive beneath the bark, something aware, something older than the forest itself. The mist rolled in slowly around the tree, curling over roots, brushing my legs. The hum pulsed stronger. I could feel it in my fingertips, in my spine, in my chest. It was alive, and it knew I was here. I stepped back finally. The forest returned slowly, leaves rustling faintly, branches swaying without wind. The mist lingered, curling around the base of the hollow tree. The pulse continued inside, soft, patient, deliberate. I could not leave, not entirely. I could step away, but a part of me remained inside that hollow. The heartbeat beneath the bark, the hum beneath the soil, the warmth curling around my fingers. It had claimed a quiet piece of me. I walked slowly away, never turning my back completely. The hollow remained, silent but alive, waiting, and I knew that whenever I returned, it would pulse again, warm, patient, deliberate, and I would feel it in my chest once more. The forest opened into a clearing. At first, it seemed familiar. Soft moss underfoot, scattered stones, trees curling overhead, but something felt off. The air was heavier, stiller than I remembered. No wind, no rustle of leaves, just quiet. I stepped forward, noticing the trees. They leaned inward, trunks and branches forming a subtle circle. Watching, I blinked. The clearing felt smaller somehow. Or the trees had moved. I spun slowly. The edge of the clearing had shifted. What had once been a path now pressed against thick trunks. The stones that had been near the center were now closer to the edge. I froze. The air pressed against my chest, dense and cool. The moss underfoot seemed softer, yielding slightly as if holding me in place. Shadows stretched across the clearing, longer than they should have been, bending toward me like fingers. I took a cautious step back. The trees leaned further inward, their branches brushing together with a faint whisper. Not wind, not movement, but sound, deliberate. I tried to measure distance, to find a path out. The clearing had changed. It had shifted, subtly, impossibly, and it watched. The ground hummed faintly beneath my shoes, a low vibration that rose and fell like breath beneath the soil. I pressed a hand to the moss. It pulsed softly, almost alive, and I could feel the weight of the forest pressing down, patient and insistent. The shadows twisted at the edge of vision. I turned. No one there, but the clearing it had moved again. I stepped forward. The moss clung to my shoes, damp and soft. The stones shifted under my gaze, though I saw no hand move them. The trees leaned closer, their dark trunks forming a silent circle around me. The forest itself seemed to be observing, waiting. A soft draft brushed my neck. I shivered, not from cold, from the awareness that the clearing was alive, that it could move, reshape itself, close around me. I crouched, pressing both hands to the moss. A faint pulse ran beneath the soil, slow and deliberate. I realized I could feel the heartbeat of the clearing. It was patient. It was deliberate. It was aware. I tried to step away. The edge of the clearing shifted beneath my eyes, subtle, impossible to measure. The path I had come from was gone, replaced by more trees, more shadows, more silence. I glanced up. The branches arched overhead, curling toward each other. The sky visible through the canopy had changed, darker than before. Not clouds, not storm, just shadow. The moss beneath me seemed to cling tighter, almost sticky. The stones trembled faintly, though nothing touched them, and the low hum beneath the soil pulsed stronger. I sank to the ground. The clearing itself seemed to breathe. Slow inhale, slow exhale, patient, waiting. I lay back, staring at the darkening sky. The trees framed the clearing like silent sentinels, and I realized finally that the ground, the stones, the trees, they had moved while I watched. I could feel it in my chest, in my hands, in the soles of my feet. The clearing was aware of me. It remembered each step I had taken, and it would wait. I rose carefully, stepping toward what I thought was the edge. The moss clung, the shadows stretched, the ground pulsed beneath my shoes. The clearing shifted again. I could not escape. I stopped, breathed, listened. The forest was silent. No wind, no rustle, no call of animal or bird. Only the clearing, patient, aware, waiting. I backed slowly, careful not to disturb the moss, careful not to wake the pulse beneath the soil. And then I left. The clearing remained. Shadows bending inward, the trees forming their silent circle, the stones shifting subtly with a life I could not comprehend. And I knew I would return, because it waits. Always. The clearing was quiet, too quiet. Twilight had drained to gray, leaving the forest dim and soft. The leaves were still, the branches unmoving. I stepped forward, moss crunching faintly underfoot. Then I noticed them, small footprints in the soft earth, round, delicate, circling the clearing. I froze. No child was near. No voice, no laughter. Only the prints. They were fresh, pressed into the moss as though the soil had opened itself for each step. I crouched, tracing one gently with a finger. It was warm, almost alive. The earth hummed faintly beneath my hand. I walked slowly around the clearing. The footprints followed. Not beside me, not ahead, not behind, but everywhere I stepped, circling, patient, deliberate. A faint whisper ran through the trees, soft, lilting, but impossible to understand. I felt it curling around my ankles, brushing my legs, pulling my attention back to the prints. I crouched again, each step pressed into moss, yet the footprints remained, sometimes doubled, sometimes spaced farther apart, a pattern I could not recognize, a rhythm I could not follow. The air smelled of wet earth and faint decay. A gentle, metallic tang lingered, subtle but insistent. The forest seemed to lean closer, trees bending ever so slightly. The clearing itself was alive, patient, waiting. I tried to call out, to speak. My voice died in my throat. The footprints moved silently in response. Not toward me, not away, just waiting. I traced another step with my fingertips. The moss pulsed faintly beneath my hand. A heartbeat, slow, deliberate, not mine. Shadows stretched across the clearing, twisting and bending in shapes I could not recognize. I rose slowly, stepping backward. The footprints remained, circling, patient. I left the clearing eventually, but the steps followed me in my mind, soft, deliberate, waiting for the next step I would take. A branch arched low over the path. A strip of cloth hung from it, pale and frayed. It swayed gently, though the air was still. I stepped closer. The fabric was rough beneath my fingers, damp with evening dew. The forest smelled faintly of earth and something older, something metallic. I pulled it free. A sudden cold draft brushed my neck. Shivers ran down my spine. I could hear faint laughter in the distance. Not from a person. Not quite human. The cloth swung in my hand. Light caught on the fibers, casting shadows across the moss. I felt the forest lean in, listening. The windless branches above shifted slightly. A low hum rose beneath the earth. The soil beneath my feet pulsed faintly, synchronized with the cold that pressed against my skin. I dropped the cloth. It hovered for a moment, then fluttered to the ground without touching it. The laughter faded, leaving only soft echoes curling through the clearing. I stepped back. The trees arched closer, framing the clearing like silent sentinels. The moss pressed down beneath my boots. The pulse beneath the soil remained, faint but insistent. I left the clearing slowly. The cloth stayed behind, swaying gently, waiting for the next hand to touch it. The night was clear, colder than I expected. Mist curled around the roots and stones, soft and silent. I looked up. 2 moons hovered above the trees, one pale and familiar, the other darker, closer, watching. Shadows stretched across the clearing, long and thin. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and something sweet, almost metallic. A low hum vibrated through the soil beneath my boots. I stepped closer to the center. The moon's light cast the trees into strange angles. Branches arched inward, leaning over the clearing like fingers. The pulse beneath the earth synced with the glow above, slow, deliberate, alive. The darker moon seemed to follow me. I blinked. It moved with my gaze, closer, pressing into my chest. I crouched, tracing a finger through the moss. It pulsed faintly. The earth beneath it vibrated with a heartbeat not my own. Shadows twisted at the edges of vision. The trees leaned closer. The light of the moon shifted, flickering like breathing. I rose slowly. The clearing itself seemed aware of my presence. The darker moon stared closer. The air pressed gently, softly, insistently against my shoulders. I stepped back, careful, eyes on the moons. The brighter one softened. The darker one lingered, patient, deliberate, watching. I left eventually. The clearing remained beneath the two moons. One bright, familiar, safe. The other closer, patient, aware, waiting. The clearing was empty. Soft moss covered the ground, pressed into the earth. Near the center, a small pile of stones rested, neat and deliberate. I approached. The stones were cold, smooth, worn by time. I looked away briefly, and when I looked back, the pile had grown taller. I stepped closer. Each glance seemed to add another layer. A quiet, impossible movement. The forest leaned in, branches curling over the clearing, shadows stretching across the moss. The earth beneath my boots pulsed faintly. A low hum rose from beneath the stones. I pressed a hand to the pile. It vibrated softly, alive, patient, deliberate. I stepped back. The pile grew taller still. I could feel in my chest, in my hands, the subtle insistence of the stones, moving without touch. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, iron, and something older. Shadows shifted at the edges of vision. The forest seemed to be watching. I left slowly, heart thumping. Each glance back showed the pile taller than before. Waiting, mist rolled through the forest, thick and soft. It curled around roots and stones, pressing gently against my legs. I paused, a movement in the fog. Slow, deliberate. The mist shifted as though exhaling. I stopped breathing. The air pressed against my neck. A warm brush, soft, almost intimate. Not wind, not human. I stepped forward. The fog pulsed, curling around my ankles, rising to my knees. Every movement pressed into it, but the shapes remained just out of reach. A low hum rose from the soil beneath my feet. The mist followed its rhythm, curling and recoiling. I could feel the warmth brush my neck again, faint, fleeting, deliberate. I turned slowly. Nothing, just the fog, but the pressure lingered. The heartbeat beneath the soil pulsed faintly, slower than my own. The forest leaned in. Branches arched overhead, bending like ribs over the fog. The mist pressed closer. Every inhale felt like the breath of something unseen. I crouched, letting the fog curl around my hands. The pulse beneath the earth grew stronger. The warmth followed, brushing softly against my neck and shoulders. It was alive, patient, deliberate. I rose slowly. The fog swirled around my boots. Shadows twisted within it, long and soft. I stepped forward. The warmth pressed again, soft, persistent. I left the clearing slowly. The mist remained, curling and breathing in place. The pulse beneath the soil lingered. The breath followed, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next soul to wander through. The clearing opened to a campsite. Tents were pitched neatly. A fire pit lay cold and undisturbed. Food was set out on a rough wooden table, plates and bowls arranged as if someone had just stepped away. I stepped closer. No one was there, not a single soul. The forest pressed in, quiet, patient. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet pine. I bent over the plates. Bread, fruit, even a small pot of stew. All untouched, all cold. The hum of the forest rose softly beneath my boots, subtle, insistent. I glanced around. The tents were silent. Flaps swayed slightly, though the air was still. Shadows clung to the corners of the clearing, bending toward me, watching. I approached the fire pit. No ash stirred. No warmth rose. And yet I felt it, the pulse beneath the earth, faint, deliberate, alive. I stepped back. The forest leaned in, branches swaying without wind. The clearing seemed to breathe softly, as though aware of my presence. A low whisper rose from beneath the soil. Not words, just tone. Soft, insistent, patient. I pressed a hand to the ground. It vibrated faintly beneath my palm, syncing with my heartbeat. I left the campsite slowly. The tents remained, the food untouched. The clearing was patient, and the forest would wait for the next camper. The clearing was quiet. Moonlight filtered through the branches, soft and pale. I noticed my shadow immediately. It stretched long and thin, moving as I moved. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then I stopped, and my shadow lingered. It stayed in place, a few steps behind. I blinked. It did not move toward me, nor did it step away. It simply watched. The forest smelled damp and metallic, the air thick with soft, invisible tension. Leaves rustled faintly, though no wind blew. I took a step forward. The shadow remained, stretching, waiting. I stepped faster. It began to move, slow, deliberate, trailing me like a silent watcher. A faint hum rose from the soil, the pulse of the clearing beneath my boots. The shadow's form stretched slightly, bending toward the rhythm of that heartbeat. I stopped again. It did not mirror me this time. Instead, it twisted slightly, almost alive, curling at the edges, patient and deliberate. I tried to turn, but the shadow mirrored only partially. A step to the left, lag. A step forward, lag. It was not mine entirely. The forest leaned closer. Shadows stretched and merged with my own. Branches whispered overhead. The pulse beneath the ground grew stronger, a heartbeat I could feel in my chest. I ran. The shadow followed, not in perfect sync, not in fear, but with patience, with awareness. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. The shadow paused too, stretching long across the moss, curling around roots. I realized then it would wait. Always. Patient, persistent, the forest opened to a clearing covered in ash. Soft gray, weightless. It smoothed over every stone, every branch, every root. I stepped forward. The ash yielded beneath my boots. No footprints appeared. And yet, faint impressions already existed. Small, deliberate, impossible to trace. The air smelled dry and metallic. A faint hum rose from beneath the surface. The pulse of the clearing pressed softly against my chest. I crouched, brushing the ash with a finger. The imprint deepened beneath my touch. It shifted slowly, curling around the shape of something unseen. Shadows stretched across the ash, long and soft. The forest pressed in, patient and deliberate. Branches swayed without wind, framing the clearing. I stepped forward. The ash clung to my shoes, soft and yielding. The impression seemed to follow me, moving beneath the surface, patient, deliberate. The air grew colder. Not wind, not draft, but pressure, like something breathing softly beneath the earth. I pressed my hand to the ash. It pulsed faintly beneath my palm, a heartbeat not my own. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I rose slowly. The clearing remained. Ash soft, impressions moving beneath. And I left, but the pulse lingered in my chest. The forest shimmered faintly in the moonlight. A ring of fireflies hovered above the moss, glowing in perfect, synchronized circles. I stepped closer. The air smelled of wet moss and faint sweetness. The glow reflected softly on the damp leaves and stones. I crouched, mesmerized. A faint hum rose beneath the forest floor, syncing with the flicker of the fireflies. A subtle vibration pressed into my chest. I stepped into the ring. The glow seemed to shift, wrapping around me. Soft, warm, deliberate. A faint singing echoed, too soft to identify. I could feel it in my bones, rising to the soles of my feet, through my hands, through my chest. The forest leaned closer. Shadows stretched into the ring, bending toward me like fingers. The pulse beneath the ground grew stronger. The singing grew low, insistent, curling through the clearing. I stepped out. The fireflies stayed, glowing, circling, patient, waiting for the next soul to enter their ring. The forest was quiet. Damp moss covered every root and stone. I crouched near an old oak. A whisper rose from beneath the roots, soft, low, curling through the earth. Not words I knew, only tones deliberate and patient. I pressed a hand to the soil. The vibration ran up my fingers, into my arm, into my chest. A pulse beneath the roots, slow, steady. The whisper grew, curling into my ears. It called names I had never given, names I did not recognize, yet felt familiar in my bones. I stepped back. The roots seemed to shift subtly beneath my feet, moving like veins. The forest leaned closer. Branches swayed without wind. The pulse beneath the soil synced with the whispers. I could feel it in my chest, in my hands, in my legs. Patient, deliberate, alive. I crouched again, listening. The roots hummed faintly, curling around me. The whisper threaded through my mind. Soft, insistent, aware. I rose slowly. The forest held its breath. The clearing waited. The whispers lingered beneath the roots. Patient, watching. I left slowly. The names echoed faintly in my mind. The forest remained. The pulse beneath the soil continued. The whispers waited for the next step into the clearing. Moonlight spilled softly across the grass, but the ground itself shimmered faintly. A pale glow rose from the moss and leaves. I stepped forward. The light pressed gently against my skin, soft, warm, inviting. The forest leaned in, quiet and patient. I sat on the grass. The glow pulsed beneath me, almost like breathing. Dreams drifted at the edge of my mind. Soft, strange visions that felt familiar and impossible at once. The air smelled of wet earth and something sweeter, like faint incense. A hum rose beneath the soil, gentle and steady, curling into my chest. I pressed my hands to the glowing grass. The warmth seeped into my palms. I closed my eyes. Visions deepened. Faces I didn't know. Places I couldn't name. Emotions that weren't mine. The clearing watched silently. Patient, I rose eventually. The glow faded slowly, but the warmth lingered. The visions faded, leaving a faint sense of regret, like stepping away from something sacred. I walked slowly. The clearing remained soft and luminous, waiting for the next soul to sit quietly in its embrace. I saw it at the edge of the clearing. A deer, pale, silent, stepping softly over moss and stone. Its head lifted slowly. Its eyes were empty sockets. Yet it stared, not with sight, not with judgment, but with attention, deliberate and patient. I froze. The air grew cold, thick and damp. Leaves shivered without wind. The forest leaned in, watching. The deer took a step closer. Its hooves pressed softly into moss, leaving no mark. Its gaze followed me, not hostile, not fearful, aware, patient. I tried to move. It mirrored me, though slowly, carefully. The shadows stretched from the trees, merging with the deer's pale form. The pulse beneath the soil hummed faintly, syncopated with the rhythm of my chest. I stepped backward. The deer remained patient, unblinking. I realized then it was not a creature of flesh, but the clearing itself, a sentinel, watching. I left slowly, careful not to glance over my shoulder. Yet the presence lingered, cold, patient, deliberate, waiting. I stepped away from the clearing. The forest had thinned, moonlight spilling between trunks. Mist curled around the roots. But the cold, it pressed against my back. Slow, deliberate, like invisible fingers tracing my spine. Not wind, not draft, something patient. I walked faster. The chill persisted. It followed, brushing my shoulders, coiling around my chest. Every step I took seemed to echo in the forest. Faint, deliberate. Leaves rustled faintly behind me. Not wind, not animals. A soft, persistent brushing, moving with me. I glanced back. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. The mist curled and pressed toward me. The pulse beneath the forest floor grew faintly louder. I pressed a hand to my chest. The heartbeat beneath the soil echoed in mine. The cold lingered, persistent, aware. It would not leave. I moved faster. Branches arched over the trail. Shadows stretched, pressed, and leaned. The cold pressed harder, brushing every inch of skin. I stumbled onto a small clearing. The forest seemed to pause. The mist swirled, curling around my boots. The cold lingered, patient. And I realized it would follow. Always. Shards of glass lay scattered across the moss. Moonlight caught the edges, reflecting pale, distorted shapes. I stepped closer. Every shard reflected me. And beside me, someone else. Someone I did not know, not fully, but familiar enough to unsettle me. I moved. The reflection followed. Each step, each turn created more faces beside mine. Some twisted, some faint, all watching. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp and cold. The forest leaned closer, branches framing the mirrors like silent sentinels. A hum rose from beneath the soil. Soft, steady, deliberate. I knelt. The shards reflected not just the forest, but memories I could not name. I pressed a hand to one. The cold seared through my palm, pulsing like the heartbeat beneath the clearing. I stood, stepping carefully through the mirrors. Each reflection multiplied, stretching endlessly. The forest leaned closer. The hum beneath my feet, synchronized with the images. Patient, aware, I left the clearing slowly. The shards remained, reflecting, watching, waiting. No matter how far I walked, the path led me back. The forest twisted, the trails folded in on themselves. Eventually I saw it, the clearing, as if it had never been left behind. Soft moss beneath my feet, twisted branches leaning inward, patient and deliberate. I stepped forward. The forest leaned closer. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and something older, patient. The pulse beneath the soil pressed softly against my chest. I looked around. The trees framed the clearing perfectly. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending toward the center. I realized something then. I had been returning, not lost, not wandering, but drawn. The clearing had been waiting. I crouched. The soil beneath my fingers hummed faintly. The moss pressed softly against my palms. A heartbeat rose beneath the ground, slow, deliberate, patient. Soft whispers ran through the trees. No words, only tone. They curled around me, brushing my shoulders, coiling around my chest. I rose slowly. The clearing watched. The shadows shifted slightly. The pulse beneath the soil grew faintly stronger, and I understood it had known I would return. I stepped carefully across the moss. Every movement pressed into the clearing, leaving faint impressions that vanished almost immediately. The forest leaned closer. Patient, deliberate. I turned to leave. The path stretched before me, but my steps returned inevitably. The clearing waited. It always would. I sank to the ground. The moss soft, the soil pulsing beneath my palms. I closed my eyes and felt it, patient, deliberate, eternal, waiting.